In the year 272 CE, Roman legions surrounded the army of Queen Zenobia outside the ancient city of Antioch. Her generals, hardened by years of warfare across the eastern provinces, understood what capture meant for soldiers and commanders alike. Execution was the standard fate for those who had defied Rome. But as they watched their queen taken into custody, they would witness something different. Rome had developed a sophisticated system for handling captured royalty, one designed not simply to punish, but to send messages that would echo across continents and through generations. The treatment of defeated queens reveals fundamental aspects of Roman imperial power. To understand what happened to these women, we must first examine the legal structures that governed their fate once captured. Roman citizenship carried extraordinary privileges. Citizens possessed legal protections codified in the 12 Tables, Rome's foundational legal code, dating to the 5th century BCE. These protections shielded Romans from arbitrary punishment. Flogging a Roman citizen was scandalous. Executing one without proper trial could spark riots. The poet Cicero emphasized this point when he declared that it was a crime even to bind a Roman citizen, let alone to strike one. War captives existed in an entirely different category. Under the principle known as jus gentium, the law of nations, military defeat fundamentally transformed a person's legal status. Once a city surrendered or an army fell in battle, its inhabitants could be legally enslaved regardless of their previous rank. A queen commanded no more legal standing than the lowest foot soldier in her defeated forces. This wasn't an oversight or exception in Roman law. It was deliberate policy. The framework created a stark divide. On one side stood those protected by Roman citizenship. On the other stood everyone else, subject to treatment that would have been criminal if applied to Romans themselves. Royal blood offered no protection. Gender provided no sanctuary. The law made no distinctions based on nobility or status. Foreign captives could be displayed, sold, mistreated, or killed at the discretion of their Roman captors. The historian Tacitus documented this reality when describing events in Britain during the 1st century CE. He noted with a queen commanded no more legal standing than the lowest foot soldier in her defeated forces. This wasn't an oversight or exception in Roman law. It was deliberate policy. The framework created a stark divide. On one side stood those protected by Roman citizenship. On the other stood everyone else, subject to treatment that would have been criminal if applied to Romans themselves. Royal blood offered no protection. Gender provided no sanctuary. The law made no distinctions based on nobility or status. Foreign captives could be displayed, sold, mistreated, or killed at the discretion of their Roman captors. The historian Tacitus documented this reality when describing events in Britain during the 1st century CE. He noted with unusual directness that Roman officials showed no hesitation in their treatment of defeated British royalty. His account suggests that even by Roman standards, which accepted considerable brutality in warfare, there were actions that shocked contemporary observers. Female captives faced particular vulnerabilities within this system. Roman military culture, forged through centuries of conquest, regarded captured women as spoils of war. While some elite prisoners might be housed in relative comfort pending ransom negotiations or political settlements, most faced immediate degradation. The distinction between prisoner of war and slave existed primarily on paper. In practice, defeat dissolved all former status. This legal framework didn't emerge randomly. It served specific purposes within Rome's imperial strategy. By stripping defeated rulers of legal protections, Rome created powerful incentives for submission. Kingdoms on the frontier understood that resistance carried consequences extending far beyond military defeat. The treatment of captured royalty demonstrated that no throne was too high, no lineage too ancient, to be reduced to powerlessness. The system also satisfied psychological needs within Roman society. Citizens who would never see distant battlefields could witness tangible proof of military victories. The degradation of foreign rulers reinforced Roman superiority and justified the empire's expansion. Every captured monarch became a living demonstration that Rome stood above all other powers. For queens specifically, this system posed profound challenges. In most ancient societies, royal women wielded considerable power. They governed territories, commanded armies, negotiated treaties, and shaped policy. Queen Zenobia of Palmyra controlled an empire stretching from Egypt to Anatolia. Boudica of the Iceni led British tribes in rebellion. Cleopatra of Egypt maneuvered between the great powers of her era. These were women accustomed to authority and respect. Captured transformed them from sovereigns into property. Their former power became irrelevant. Their royal lineage meant nothing. They entered a legal category that offered no protection from humiliation or abuse. This transition from ruler to captive represented a complete inversion of status, one that Roman officials deliberately exploited. The treatment of defeated queens served as both punishment and propaganda. It punished those who had resisted Rome while simultaneously warning others of the consequences of defiance. When kingdoms on the frontier heard what befell captured rulers, they faced difficult calculations about the true cost of independence. The Roman triumph transformed military victory into public spectacle. When the Senate granted a general permission to celebrate a triumph, preparations began for an elaborate procession that would parade Rome's dominance through the city streets for all to witness. The route stretched nearly 4 kilometers, from the Campus Martis through the Forum and up to the Capitoline Hill. These processions followed careful choreography designed to maximize psychological impact. Musicians and entertainers led the parade. Carts followed, bearing paintings and models of conquered cities and distant lands. Wild animals from exotic territories were led in chains, offering Romans glimpses of worlds their legions had subdued. Then came the prisoners of war, walking in shackles at the heart of the spectacle. Captured rulers marched at the front of the prisoner column. Their royal garments were often left intact to emphasize the magnitude of their fall. Queens who had commanded armies now shuffled in chains before crowds that jeered and celebrated their humiliation. The contrast was deliberate. By displaying monarchs in full regalia while bound and powerless, Rome communicated that no kingdom stood beyond reach and no throne guaranteed safety. Queen Zenobia's appearance in Emperor Aurelian's triumph of 274 CE exemplifies this practice. The Historia, a collection of imperial biographies written in the 4th century, provides detailed descriptions drawing on eyewitness accounts. Zenobia was adorned with jewels that caught the sunlight, but it was her chains that drew the most attention. These were not simple iron shackles. She walked bound in heavy golden chains, so massive that guards marched beside her to help bear their weight. The choice of gold was calculated symbolism. These chains represented the very wealth she had commanded, now turned into instruments of her bondage. Her entire person became a walking display of conquered riches. Ancient sources note that despite the weight and the hours of slow marching through hostile crowds, Zenobia maintained remarkable composure. This dignity may have influenced her fate. Rather than execution, Aurelian granted her a villa near Rome, where she lived out her remaining years as a permanent reminder of Roman power. The case of Boudica presents a darker picture. In 60 CE, King Protasigus of the Iceni died, leaving a will that bequeathed half his territory to Emperor Nero and half to his 2 daughters. He hoped this compromise would preserve some independence while satisfying Roman demands. Roman officials ignored the will entirely, seizing all Iceni lands and declaring the kingdom forfeit. When Queen Boudica protested, she faced punishment that demonstrated how little protection royal status afforded. Tacitus, whose father-in-law served in Britain during this period, recorded what followed. Boudica was publicly flogged. Her daughters were assaulted by Roman soldiers. Tacitus describes these events with unusual directness, placing them at the center of his explanation for the rebellion that followed. The abuse was not random violence but calculated degradation. Its public nature multiplied the impact. By humiliating the royal family before their subjects, Roman officials sent messages about the fate awaiting those who questioned imperial authority. The strategy backfired. Rather than crushing resistance, the abuse ignited a rebellion that nearly drove Rome from Britain. Boudica raised an army that destroyed 3 Roman cities, including Londinium, killing tens of thousands. Tacitus preserves a speech he attributes to Boudica in which she declares she fights not as a queen seeking to preserve her kingdom, but as a woman avenging the wrongs done to her and her daughters. The rebellion ended in defeat. Tacitus claims Boudica poisoned herself rather than face capture. The fate of her daughters goes unrecorded. They vanish from historical accounts, their stories lost to silence. Not all triumphs ended with survival. The Mamertine prison, known in Latin as the Tullianum, served as the final stop for Rome's most notable enemies. This ancient structure built into the Capitoline Hill consisted of 2 levels. The lower dungeon, accessible only through a hole in the ceiling, became an execution chamber. Here in darkness, condemned prisoners met their end through strangulation or starvation. The treatment of captured queens reveals how power operated in the ancient world. Legal protections evaporated at the boundary of conquest, dignity dissolved in defeat. The documented cases from Tacitus, Cassius Dio, and other ancient historians show deliberate cruelty embedded in Roman imperial policy. The flogging of Boudica, the golden chains on Zenobia, and the executions following triumphs were not aberrations but calculated strategies, designed to break resistance and display power. The stone walls of the Mamertine prison still stand in Rome today, reminding us that the triumphs celebrated in ancient texts were built on human suffering. Queens who had commanded armies and administered justice found themselves reduced to spectacles. Their degradation transformed into entertainment for crowds who never had to confront the true cost of empire.